The Advanced Xenobiology Lecture Hall at the Galactic Academy was supposed to be the safest place in known space. Triple reinforced walls, environmental controls calibrated for 47 different species, and security systems that could detect a hostile thought from 3 star systems away. Nobody had told the lecture hall about humans. Professor Nyth of the Crystalline Collective stood at the holographic display, his geometric form refracting the light from the projection into prismatic patterns across the walls. Today's topic was Extreme Environment Predators, a comprehensive analysis of Deathworld fauna, and he'd been preparing this lecture for the better part of a decade. "Class," he announced, his voice carrying the harmonic undertones that made his species excellent educators, "today we examine the galaxy's most dangerous predators. Creatures so deadly that entire civilizations have fallen to single specimens." The assembled students, representing 23 different species from across known space, leaned forward with academic interest. This was advanced coursework, the kind of education that separated career researchers from weekend nature enthusiasts. "Our first specimen," Professor Nyth continued, activating the display, "is the Void Stalker of the Kepler 42 and 42 system." The hologram showed a creature that looked like someone had taken every nightmare in the galaxy and compressed them into a single predatory form. 8 feet of muscle, bone, and malevolent intelligence, with claws that could rend starship hull plating and teeth designed for armor penetration. "Notice the adaptive camouflage capabilities," Professor Nyth explained. "Void Stalkers can become virtually invisible in any environment. They hunt by—" "Actually," interrupted a voice from the back of the lecture hall, "they're not that good at camouflage in jungle environments." Every head, sensor array, and optical organ in the room turned to stare at the human exchange student. Katie Mitchell sat in the back row, looking exactly like what she was, a 22-year-old anthropology major from a small agricultural planet who'd somehow qualified for the most advanced xenobiology program in the galaxy. She had brown hair that refused to stay in any configuration resembling professional, green eyes that seemed to find everything slightly amusing, and the kind of relaxed confidence that suggested she'd never met a problem she couldn't solve by hitting it with something heavy. "Excuse me?" Professor Nyth's prismatic form flickered with what his species called academic confusion. "Void Stalkers," Katie said, consulting what appeared to be handwritten notes rather than the standard digital interfaces everyone else was using. "Their camouflage tech is great for rocky or metallic environments, but they've got serious problems with vegetation. The frequency modulation doesn't account for chlorophyll absorption spectra." The lecture hall had gone completely silent. Professor Nyth's form was now cycling through colors that didn't have names in most languages. "Miss Mitchell," he said carefully, "Void Stalkers are considered one of the galaxy's apex predators. They've never been successfully studied in natural jungle environments because nothing survives the encounter." "Oh, we've got a couple living in the forest behind my house," Katie said matter-of-factly. "They showed up about 6 months ago. Pretty shy, actually. They mostly hunt at night and stick to the deer population." The silence that followed was the kind that happens when an entire room of people simultaneously realizes that their understanding of reality has just been fundamentally challenged. "You have Void Stalkers living behind your house?" Professor Nyth asked. "Well, technically they're in the State Forest Preserve, but yeah. Dad had to put up better fencing around the livestock after they moved in. Not because they were hunting the cattle. They're too smart to mess with domesticated animals when there's better hunting in the wild. But because the cattle kept breaking through the fence to get away from the smell." A Tentacle Federation student in the 3rd row made a noise that could only be described as a whimper. "The smell?" Professor Nyth asked. "Void Stalkers mark their territory with pheromone traces. Most prey animals can detect it subconsciously. Makes them nervous. Our cows started producing about 30% less milk until we moved them to the north pasture." Katie flipped through her notes with the casual air of someone discussing weather patterns. "Oh, and you might want to update your slide about their hunting success rate. It's not 97%, more like 63%, 78% if you account for seasonal variations in prey behavior." "How could you possibly know that?" "Trail cameras. Dad's a wildlife photographer. We've been documenting them for his book about introduced species adaptation patterns." Professor Nyth's form had gone completely transparent, which in his species indicated either deep meditation or complete psychological breakdown. Introduced species? Yeah, they're not native to Earth. We figure they probably came in on one of the cargo ships that use the spaceport about 40 miles south. Happens pretty regularly. Last year we had a family of crystal worms move into the old quarry. Year before that, some kind of phase shifter took up residence in the abandoned shopping mall. And your local authorities allow this? Katie looked genuinely puzzled. Why wouldn't they? As long as they're not bothering people or damaging property, what's the problem? The ecosystem's got plenty of room. These are creatures that have caused the evacuation of entire planets. Well, yeah, if you don't know how to deal with them. But once you understand their behavioral patterns, they're pretty manageable. Professor Nyth moved to the next slide with the desperate air of someone trying to regain control of a situation that had clearly escaped all rational parameters. Perhaps, he said, we should examine something more universally dangerous. The nightmare fish of Proxima Centauri. The hologram shifted to show something that looked like a cross between a shark and a psychological experiment gone wrong. The creature was surrounded by a haze of psychic energy that made looking at it directly an exercise in existential terror. Nightmare fish, Professor Nyth continued, his voice gaining strength, are psychic predators that feed on fear itself. They're capable of inducing paralyzing terror in any sentient being within a 3-kilometer radius. No known defense exists against their— Oh, those guys are fun, Katie said cheerfully. The temperature in the lecture hall seemed to drop by several degrees. Fun? A student from the peaceful collective asked, her voice climbing toward frequencies that suggested impending panic. Yeah, we've got a whole school of them in Lake Morrison. Really popular with the extreme sports crowd. Extreme sports? Nightmare surfing. You take a psychic dampener, nothing fancy, just enough to keep you from completely losing your mind, and then you try to surf as close to the school as possible without losing control. Current record is about 30 seconds at 50 meters. Professor Nyth seemed to be struggling with basic concepts like sanity and self-preservation. That's insane. Nah, it's actually pretty safe if you know what you're doing. The fish don't want to hurt anybody. They just want to eat fear, and humans produce really high-quality terror. It's like a symbiotic relationship. They get fed, we get an adrenaline rush. People voluntarily expose themselves to creatures that feed on psychological horror? Well, not everybody. You need a license and you have to take a safety course. Plus, there's liability insurance. But yeah, it's gotten pretty popular. Tourism board's been advertising it as the ultimate extreme experience. Katie pulled out her phone and scrolled through what appeared to be a collection of photos showing humans in various states of terror-induced ecstasy while riding boards near creatures that should have driven them insane. My little brother holds the junior division record, 43 seconds at 30 meters. Kid's got nerves of steel. A Zephyrian student who had been taking detailed notes suddenly stopped writing and stared at his tablet as if it had personally betrayed him. Ms. Mitchell, Professor Nyth said slowly, are you telling us that humans have turned one of the galaxy's most feared psychic predators into a recreational activity? I mean, when you put it like that, it sounds kind of crazy, Katie admitted. But honestly, once you get past the initial terror, they're pretty harmless. The real trick is learning to surf while experiencing existential dread. Takes practice. What happens if someone falls off their board? Usually, the fish lose interest once you're in the water. The fear signature changes when you're submerged. So they basically just ignore you. Though you do want to get out pretty quick, because the lake also has some regular sharks, and those guys are actually dangerous. Regular sharks are dangerous, but psychic predators that feed on terror are recreational? Well, yeah, the nightmare fish are predictable. You know exactly what they're going to do, try to scare you. Sharks are just sharks. They might bite you. For no reason at all. Professor Nyth was beginning to suspect that this lecture was not going according to plan. With the desperate air of someone trying to find solid ground in a conversation that had abandoned all connection to reality, he moved to his final, most terrifying example. Perhaps, he said, we should discuss something that surely even humans would find threatening, the shadow worms of the Vega system. The holographic display shifted to show something that wasn't quite there. The shadow worms existed in a state of quantum uncertainty, visible only as distortions in space-time that suggested hungry, writhing motion. They consumed matter at the subatomic level, turning everything they touched into component particles. Shadow worms, Professor Nyth said with the confidence of someone presenting an unanswerable argument, exist partially outside our reality. They consume matter by converting it directly to energy. No known material can resist them. They're essentially mobile black holes with predatory intelligence. Katie squinted at the display, tilting her head like someone trying to remember where they'd seen something before. Wait, she said. Are those the things that look like really angry spaghetti made of space? Best. One way to describe them, yes. Oh, we call those void noodles. Void noodles? Yeah, they showed up in the old subway tunnels under downtown about 3 years ago. City had to reroute the Red Line until the Exterminators Guild could figure out how to deal with them. Professor Nyth's form was now flickering so rapidly it was creating a strobe light effect. The Exterminators Guild dealt with shadow worms? Well, sort of. Turns out they're actually kind of picky eaters. They only consume inorganic matter, so the guild just started feeding them metal scrap and concrete debris. Now they're part of the city's waste management system. You're using galaxy-destroying quantum predators for garbage disposal? It's actually pretty efficient. They process about 40 tons of construction waste per day, and the energy output powers about 3 city blocks. The mayor's been talking about expanding the program. Katie pulled up another photo on her phone, this one showing what appeared to be a mundane municipal building with a sign reading Downtown Waste Processing Facility, powered by alternative energy sources. They're actually pretty social once you get to know them. The work crews have names for all of them. There's Big Bertha, she handles the heavy machinery scraps. Little Pete specializes in electronics waste, and Squiggles mostly does concrete and masonry. You've named them? Well, yeah. They've got distinct personalities. Bertha's really methodical. Pete's got a sense of humor. He arranges the leftover components into funny shapes. And Squiggles is just happy as long as he's got something to munch on. The lecture hall had achieved a level of silence that suggested either deep contemplation or collective psychological breakdown. Miss Mitchell, Professor Nyth said carefully, you seem to be suggesting that humans have not only encountered some of the galaxy's most dangerous predators, but have actually domesticated them? Domesticated's a strong word, Katie said. More like learned to coexist with them. I mean, they were here first. Here first? On Earth, yeah. Most of these species have been showing up for decades. We just adapted. She gestured around the lecture hall with the casual confidence of someone who had grown up assuming that everyone dealt with interdimensional predators on a regular basis. The real trick is understanding that most dangerous creatures aren't actually malicious. They're just trying to survive, same as everybody else. Once you figure out what they need and how to provide it safely, most problems solve themselves. Professor Nyth stared at his carefully prepared slides, each one representing what he had believed to be an insurmountable threat to galactic civilization, and realized that his entire worldview was collapsing in real time. But that wasn't the shocking part. The shocking part was when Katie suddenly went very still and turned to look directly at a corner of the lecture hall where nothing visible existed. Professor, she said quietly, I don't want to interrupt your lecture, but there's something in here that definitely shouldn't be. What do you mean? Katie's relaxed demeanor had been replaced by the kind of focused alertness that suggested she was no longer thinking about academic discussions. There's a phase hunter in the northeast corner, 3rd row, behind the crystalline student. Every being in the lecture hall froze. Phase hunters were legendary predators, creatures that existed between dimensions and could step into reality only when they were ready to kill. They were invisible, undetectable, and absolutely lethal. That's impossible, Professor Nyth whispered. Phase hunters can't be detected by any known technology. Yeah, well, I grew up around them, Katie said, slowly reaching into her backpack. You learn to recognize the signs. What signs? The way the air moves, the temperature gradient, the feeling like you're being watched by something that's deciding whether you're worth the effort. Katie pulled something out of her backpack that looked like a cross between a flashlight and a weapon that had been designed by someone with a very creative understanding of physics. Everyone stay very still, she said in the kind of calm voice that made it clear she knew exactly what she was doing. Phase hunters are ambush predators. They won't attack if they think you've spotted them, but sudden movements make them Reactive. The lecture hall had achieved the kind of silence usually reserved for religious ceremonies or funeral services. Miss Mitchell, Professor Nyth said very carefully. What exactly is that device? Phase disruptor, Katie replied matter-of-factly. Standard issue for anyone living in areas with phase hunter populations. Sends them back to whatever dimension they normally hang out in. Where did you get military-grade anti-dimensional weaponry? Military-grade? This thing? Nah, I picked it up at the hardware store. They're right next to the regular flashlights. She pointed the device at the empty corner and activated it. The air shimmered for a moment. There was a sound like reality hiccuping, and suddenly the temperature in the room returned to normal. There we go, Katie said, tucking the device back into her backpack. Sorry about that. They usually don't show up in academic buildings, but sometimes they get curious about large gatherings. Professor Nyth stared at the human student, who had just casually dealt with a threat that could have killed everyone in the room. How did you know it was there? Practice, Katie said simply. When you grow up somewhere with an active phase hunter population, you learn to pay attention to your environment. And this is normal where you come from? Well, not normal, but not unusual either. Earth's got a pretty diverse ecosystem. What happened next made galactic history, and not in a good way. The emergency faculty meeting that convened 30 minutes after Katie's casual dismissal of a phase hunter looked like the aftermath of a diplomatic incident. Professor Nyth's crystalline form was cycling through colors that didn't exist on any standard emotional spectrum, while the heads of various departments clustered around the conference table in various states of academic distress. Let me understand this correctly, said Dean Vorthak, a massive insectoid whose species had evolved from successful pack hunters, and who was therefore naturally skeptical of anything claiming to be more dangerous than his ancestors. A first-year exchange student from Earth just neutralized a phase hunter with what she claims is consumer-grade hardware store equipment. That's correct, Professor Nyth confirmed, his harmonic voice carrying undertones of professional crisis. And she claims that the creatures we consider to be apex predators of the galaxy are recreational activities on her homeworld? Also correct. Dean Vorthak's compound eyes focused on Katie, who was sitting in a chair that had been hastily requisitioned from the undergraduate dormitories, and looked completely comfortable, despite being surrounded by some of the galaxy's most distinguished xenobiologists. Ms. Mitchell, the dean said carefully, these are some rather extraordinary claims. Are they? Katie asked, pulling out her phone and scrolling through what appeared to be a social media feed. I mean, I figured you guys knew about this stuff. Earth's been part of the Galactic Council for almost 10 years now. Yes, but your planet was classified as a peaceful agricultural world with minimal indigenous threats. Huh, Katie said, showing her phone screen to the assembled faculty. Well, this is my cousin's post from last weekend. He went camping in Yellowstone. The image showed a young human male roasting marshmallows over a campfire, while in the background, clearly visible but apparently ignored, 3 Void Stalkers watched from the tree line with the patient attention of creatures waiting for an invitation to dinner. The caption says, "Great camping trip, only mild predator activity, would recommend." Katie read aloud. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Dean Vorthak's exoskeleton creaking under stress. Miss Mitchell, said Dr. Kalax from the Department of Extreme Environment Studies, I believe we need to see this for ourselves. See what? Your planet. These recreational predators, the hardware store military equipment, all of it. Katie brightened considerably. Oh, you want to visit Earth? That's awesome. My family would love to meet you guys. Dad's always excited when he gets to show off the local wildlife to visitors. This would be a formal academic expedition, Dr. Kalax clarified. Controlled conditions, proper safety protocols, scientific observation methods. Sure, whatever works, though you might want to visit during the off-season. Off-season for what? Migration season. That's when the really big stuff moves through. Last year we had a pack of stellar dreadnoughts nest in the old coal mine. Amazing to watch. But they're kind of territorial during breeding season. Professor Nyth's crystalline structure had gone completely opaque, which his species reserved for moments of existential questioning. Stellar dreadnoughts, he said slowly, are spacefaring predators the size of cruiser-class starships. Yeah, they're pretty impressive. The town actually made some decent money selling observation tours to off-world tourists. though we had to shut down air traffic for about 6 weeks while they were The assembled faculty exchanged glances that ranged from professional curiosity to barely contained terror. Very well, Dean Vorthek announced. We'll organize an expedition. Full research team, proper equipment, emergency protocols. Awesome, Katie said. I'll let my dad know we're coming. He'll probably want to clear his schedule so he can take you to all the good spots. Good spots? Yeah. The places where you can get really close to the dangerous stuff without it being, actually dangerous. The research vessel Academic Pursuit was specifically designed for xenobiological field studies in hostile environments. It carried enough firepower to sterilize a small moon, defensive systems that could repel attacks from planet crackers, and a crew trained in survival techniques that bordered on the legendary. What it was not prepared for was Katie Mitchell giving directions. Okay, so you're going to want to land in the big field behind my house, she said, consulting what appeared to be a hand-drawn map. Not the north field, that's where the phase hunters have their den, and definitely not the south field. That's where we keep the livestock. The cows get nervous around new aircraft. Captain Jorik, a veteran of 3 hostile environment expeditions and 2 actual wars, stared at the navigation display, showing a planetary surface that registered as completely benign. Ms. Mitchell, he said carefully, our sensors aren't detecting any significant predator populations in your area. Oh, they're there, Katie said cheerfully. They just don't show up on standard scans. Most of the dangerous stuff on Earth has learned to avoid detection. It's an evolutionary adaptation. Learned to avoid detection? Well, yeah. Humans have been hunting and studying everything on the planet for thousands of years. The animals that survived are the ones that figured out how to stay invisible. Dr. Kielax, who was reviewing the expedition's safety protocols for the 17th time, looked up from his tablet. Katie, when you say hunting, what exactly do you mean? Oh, sport hunting, scientific collection, pest control, population management, standard stuff. You hunt Void Stalkers for sport? Some people do. It's pretty specialized, though. You need really good equipment and a lot of patience. Plus, the licensing is expensive, and there are strict bag limits. The research team exchanged glances that suggested they were beginning to question their career choices. What about the phase hunters? Asked Dr. Yent from the Behavioral Studies Department. Those are actually protected. You can't hunt them without a special permit, and only if they're causing property damage or threatening livestock. You need permits to hunt interdimensional predators? Well, yeah. The Department of Natural Resources takes wildlife management pretty seriously. Plus, phase hunters are actually pretty important for ecosystem balance. They keep the Void Stalker population from getting out of hand. Captain Jorik activated the ship's external sensors for the 4th time, hoping to detect something that would explain why his instruments were reading normal forest and farmland instead of the interdimensional death trap he was apparently about to land in. I'm not showing anything unusual, he reported. Trust me, Katie said. They're there. You'll see them soon enough. The Academic Pursuit touched down in what appeared to be a perfectly ordinary field behind a perfectly ordinary farmhouse. The sensor readings showed normal Earth atmosphere, standard gravity, and no energy signatures that suggested anything more dangerous than agricultural equipment. Atmosphere checks out, reported the science team. Safe for all expedition members. Great, Katie said, heading for the airlock. Dad should be here any minute. He's probably bringing some of the neighbors. They love meeting off-worlders. The research team gathered their equipment and followed Katie out of the ship. The afternoon sun was warm. There was a gentle breeze carrying the scent of growing crops, and birds were singing in the nearby trees. It was exactly the kind of peaceful rural setting that appeared in tourism brochures across the galaxy. This is lovely, Dr. Kielax admitted, adjusting his portable scanner. Very pastoral. Yeah, it's nice here, Katie agreed. Oh, there's Dad. A human male in his 50s was walking across the field toward them, carrying what appeared to be a camera with several additional pieces of equipment attached. He had the weathered look of someone who spent most of his time outdoors, and the confident bearing of someone who was comfortable in his environment. Hey, honey, he called out. These your classmates? Academic expedition, Katie called back. They wanted to see the local wildlife. Excellent. I've got some great shots lined up for them. Dr. Kielax approached Katie's father with scientific enthusiasm. Mr. Mitchell, we're very interested in documenting the predator species that your daughter claims inhabit this area. Oh, you're in for a treat, Mr. Mitchell said, adjusting his camera. We've got a really active ecosystem here. Spring's actually perfect timing. Most of the dangerous stuff is coming out of hibernation and looking for food. Dangerous stuff? Nothing too serious. Though I should mention that we've had some new arrivals this season. A pack of something that looks like nightmare fish, but they're terrestrial. Been setting up territory in the old quarry. Professor Nyth's crystalline form flickered with alarm. Terrestrial nightmare fish? That's what Katie's been calling them. They seem to feed on psychological distress, just like the aquatic variety, but they've adapted for land hunting. Really fascinating from an evolutionary perspective. Are they contained? Oh, no need. They're actually pretty beneficial. They've been keeping the feral phase hunter population under control. Feral phase hunters? Yeah, we get them sometimes. Probably escaped pets that have gone wild and adapted to local conditions. They're not usually aggressive toward humans, but they can be a problem for livestock. Dr. Nyth was frantically taking notes while simultaneously trying to process the idea that phase hunters could be domesticated. Mr. Mitchell, he said carefully, when you say escaped pets, well, some people like exotic animals, though phase hunters aren't really suitable for most households. They need a lot of space, and they're difficult to house train. The nature walk that Mr. Mitchell led them on started innocently enough. He pointed out various Earth flora and fauna with the enthusiasm of someone sharing his passion for wildlife photography. The alien research team dutifully recorded everything, though their instruments continued to register only normal biological activity. Now this is interesting, Mr. Mitchell said, stopping beside what appeared to be an ordinary fallen log. See these scratches in the bark? Those are territorial markers. Dr. Kilax examined the marks with his scanner. From what species? Not sure yet. Something new that moved in over the winter. The claw configuration suggests something between a Void Stalker and a phase hunter, but the depth indicates much greater physical strength. Something new? Oh yeah, we get new species establishing territory pretty regularly. Earth's ecosystem is very adaptable. Katie knelt beside the log and ran her fingers along the scratches. These are fresh, she said. Probably made within the last few hours. How can you tell? Professor Nyth asked. Soft low, Katie explained, pointing to small beads of tree resin. And the wood hasn't oxidized yet. Whatever made these is probably still in the area. As if summoned by her words, something large moved in the forest about 50 meters away. The research team immediately activated their defensive systems and reached for their emergency equipment. Relax, Mr. Mitchell said, adjusting his camera settings. It's just checking us out. Most of the local predators are curious about visitors. Just checking us out? Dr. Kilax asked, his voice climbing toward panic frequencies. Yeah. They're very social. They like to observe new things before deciding whether to make contact. What if they decide we're food? Katie and her father exchanged glances. Well, Katie said slowly, that's probably not going to happen. Probably? The thing is, Mr. Mitchell explained, most of the dangerous predators around here have learned to avoid humans. We're kind of at the top of the local food chain. Your apex predators? More like the predators that the apex predators have learned to respect. The movement in the forest was getting closer, and the research team could now make out multiple large shapes moving between the trees, with the coordinated precision of pack hunters. Dr. Nyth said, his voice barely above a whisper. There seem to be quite a few of them. Oh yeah, Katie said, suddenly looking concerned for the first time since they'd arrived. That's actually not normal. What do you mean? Well, usually the local predators avoid areas when humans are present. The fact that they're approaching means... She trailed off, scanning the forest with the focused attention of someone who had just realized that something was very wrong. Katie? Her father asked. Dad? She said quietly. I think we might have a problem. What kind of problem? Katie reached into her backpack and pulled out the phase disruptor, along with several other devices that definitely hadn't come from any hardware store. The kind where something bigger and meaner has caught our scent, and everything else is trying to get to safety. The forest had gone completely silent. What's bigger and meaner than Void Stalkers and phase hunters? Professor Nyth asked. Katie checked her equipment with the efficient motions of someone who had done this before. On Earth? She said. Lots of things. The alarm that was wailing across the Mitchell property wasn't coming from the research vessel. It was coming from speakers mounted on trees, fence posts, and what appeared to be a converted grain silo. The sound was distinctly organic, less like a mechanical warning and more like the distress call of something very large and very angry. "Township Emergency Alert System," Mr. Mitchell explained, shouldering what appeared to be a rifle that had been modified with technology that definitely wasn't standard Earth manufacturing. "Haven't heard that sound in about 3 years. "What does it mean?" Dr. Kalax asked, though his scanner readings were starting to show energy signatures that made his species equivalent of blood pressure spike dramatically. "Territorial breach," Katie said, checking her equipment with practiced efficiency. "Something big has moved into the area without following proper protocols. Most of the dangerous stuff around here has learned to coexist with human settlements. There are, understandings, agreements, rules about who hunts where and when." The forest around them was now completely silent except for the alarm, but that silence felt alive, watchful, like every tree was holding its breath. "And something just broke those rules?" Professor Nyth asked. "Broke them, ignored them, or—" Mr. Mitchell paused, consulting what looked like a military-grade communication device, "or something arrived that doesn't know they exist." The device in his hands crackled, with voices speaking in rapid English, punctuated by technical terminology that the universal translators were struggling to process. "Bill, this is Margaret down at the old Hendricks place. I've got readings suggesting something Class 7 just manifested near your property." "Copy that, Margaret. We've got visitors with us. Academic types." "Oh, hell, Bill. You need to get them to shelter immediately. This isn't a Class 7. Whatever just showed up is reading as Class 9s or higher." The research team exchanged glances that ranged from confused to terrified. They'd never heard of a threat classification system that went beyond "What's Class 9? Dr. Nyth asked. Katie and her father were now moving with the kind of coordinated efficiency that suggested they'd done this before. "Class 9 is—" Katie paused, apparently trying to find words that would translate properly. "It's the kind of thing that doesn't normally exist in our dimension." "What do you mean?" "I mean, it's the kind of predator that hunts between realities. The kind that treats physical laws as suggestions rather than rules." Mr. Mitchell was scanning the forest with what appeared to be a device that was part telescope, part targeting system, and part something that hurt to look at directly. "There," he said, pointing toward a section of forest that looked exactly like every other section of forest. "About 300 meters northeast. It's big." "How big?" Professor Nyth asked. "Big enough that it's affecting local gravity." Dr. Kalax's scanner was now producing readings that should have been impossible. Mass estimates that fluctuated wildly, energy signatures that existed in spectrums his equipment wasn't designed to measure, and spatial distortions that suggested something was bending reality around itself. "This is fascinating," he said, apparently forgetting to be terrified in the face of unprecedented scientific data. "The electromagnetic readings alone are—" "Doctor," Katie interrupted, "this really isn't the time for scientific observation, but the data we could gather from a creature like this would be extremely interesting to read about in whatever journal publishes your posthumous work." The forest around them was beginning to change. Not obviously. The trees were still trees, the undergrowth was still undergrowth, but something fundamental about the space they occupied was shifting. "The air tastes different," Dr. Nyth observed. "That's because it's not entirely our air anymore," Mr. Mitchell explained. "Whatever's out there is bringing its own environment with it." "Its own environment?" "Class 9 predators don't just hunt in our reality. They hunt across multiple realities simultaneously. What we're seeing is just the part of it that's choosing to exist in our dimension." The alarm system changed pitch, moving from a general warning to something that sounded like a countdown. "Okay," Katie said, "that's our cue to move." "Move where?" Professor Nyth asked. "The house. It's got better shielding." "Shielding against what?" "Everything." They began moving toward the farmhouse, but the journey that should have taken 3 minutes was becoming increasingly surreal. The path seemed longer than it had been. The house appeared to be moving further away even as they walked toward it, and the shadows were falling in directions that had nothing to do with the position of the sun. "Space is becoming non-Euclidean," Dr. Kalax reported, consulting his instruments with the fascination of someone discovering new laws of physics. "The geometric properties of our local area are being actively modified. Yeah, Katie said, pulling out what appeared to be a compass that was pointing in 6 different directions simultaneously. That's why we need to get to the house. Dad had it specially modified after the last reality bender moved through. Reality bender? Technical term for anything that can rewrite local physics. We get them every few years. Usually they're just passing through, but sometimes they decide they like the neighborhood. The farmhouse, when they finally reached it, looked exactly like a normal rural home except for the fact that it was surrounded by devices that definitely belonged in a science fiction movie. Antenna arrays, field generators, and what appeared to be a satellite dish that was tracking something invisible across the sky. "Welcome to Cosma Mitchell," Mr. Mitchell said, ushering them through a front door that was 6 inches thick and made of something that hurt to look at directly. Home sweet, heavily fortified home. The interior looked like someone had taken a normal family house and decided to upgrade it for alien invasion. The living room had comfortable furniture and family photos, but the walls were lined with equipment that pulsed with quiet energy, and the windows showed views that didn't quite match the outside they'd just walked through. "The shielding creates a localized reality bubble," Katie explained, noticing the research team's confused expressions. "As long as we're in here, we exist in normal space-time with standard physics." "How is this possible?" Professor Nyth asked. "Dad used to work for the Department of Dimensional Stability before he became a wildlife photographer." "There's a Department of Dimensional Stability? Someone has to keep track of all the weird stuff that shows up on Earth?" "Dad was head of exotic threat assessment for the Pacific Northwest region." Mitchell was consulting what appeared to be a wall-mount command center that would have looked appropriate on a military starship. "Okay," he said. "The good news is that our visitor doesn't seem to be actively hunting, it's just exploring. And the bad news? The bad news is that when Class 9 entities explore, they tend to reshape their environment to make it more suitable for their needs." Through the windows, they could see the forest changing. Trees were growing taller, their branches reaching toward configurations that created geometric patterns. The ground was shifting, forming elaborate spirals and mathematical constructs. Even the sky was taking on hues that didn't have names. "It's terraforming," Dr. Keelax breathed. "It's remaking the local environment to match its dimensional requirements." "Yeah, they do that," Katie said. "The last one turned about 50 acres into something that resembled a 4-dimensional maze. Took the cleanup crew 6 months to restore normal spacetime." "Cleanup crew?" "Government specialists. They handle situations that are too weird for local authorities." The next hour provided the research team with an education in human threat assessment that no academic course could have prepared them for. Through the modified windows of the Mitchell house, they watched as something that existed across multiple dimensions simultaneously reshaped the local environment to suit its incomprehensible needs. "The radiation readings are off the charts," Dr. Yent reported. "But they're not harmful radiation. They're just impossible radiation." "Yeah. Class 9 entities tend to emit energy that doesn't technically exist," Mr. Mitchell explained, monitoring his own displays. "The shielding filters out anything that would cause immediate cellular damage. But prolonged exposure can cause interesting side effects." "What kind of side effects?" "Oh, minor stuff. Temporary synesthesia, precognitive dreams, ability to see in 4 dimensions, nothing permanent." Katie was examining her own equipment, which included devices that looked like they'd been designed by someone with a very creative understanding of both physics and practical engineering. "Dad, the displacement readings are getting pretty high. Whatever's out there is starting to anchor itself to our reality." "Is that bad?" Professor Nyth asked. "It depends on what it decides to do once it's fully materialized," Mr. Mitchell said. "Some of them are just curious tourists, others are—" He paused, checking his readings. "Others are looking for a new hunting ground." "And which is this one?" "Well, the good news is that it hasn't started actively hunting yet. The bad news is that it's been systematically testing our defenses." "Testing them how?" Katie pointed to the windows, which were now showing a view of the forest that definitely wasn't the same forest they'd walked through earlier. The trees had rearranged themselves into patterns that suggested intelligent design, and the paths between them formed geometric shapes that were somehow both beautiful and deeply unsettling. "It's been probing the reality bubble around the house, checking for weaknesses," Learning how our defensive systems work. Sounds very intelligent. Class 9 entities are usually extremely intelligent. They have to be, to exist across multiple realities simultaneously. The communication system crackled with another transmission. Bill, this is emergency coordination. We've got teams en route, but they're still 20 minutes out. How are you holding up? We're secure for now, but our visitor is showing signs of establishing permanent residence. Copy that. Be advised that we've upgraded the threat classification to Class X. The silence that followed was the kind that happens when experienced people realize they're dealing with something beyond their normal parameters. There's a Class X? Katie asked. Apparently there is now, her father replied. Dr. Kilax was frantically taking readings and making notes, his scientific excitement overriding his survival instincts. This is unprecedented, he said. A creature that can rewrite local physics, exists across multiple dimensions, and demonstrates strategic intelligence. The research applications alone, Doctor, Katie interrupted gently. You're talking about studying something that could erase you from existence by thinking about you too hard. But the scientific value would be very difficult to publish if the researcher doesn't exist in any reality where academic journals are printed. Through the windows, they could see movement in the transformed forest. Not the movement of a physical creature, but the movement of space itself, flowing and reshaping as something vast and incomprehensible moved through dimensions that intersected with their own. It's beautiful, Dr. Nyth whispered. Yeah, Katie agreed. That's part of the problem. Class 9 and above entities often have an aesthetic component to their hunting strategy. They make their territory attractive to potential prey. Are we prey? Well, we're certainly not predators compared to something like that. The house's defensive systems began making new sounds. Not alarms, but something that sounded almost like music. Harmonics that seemed to resonate with frequencies that existed just beyond normal hearing. What's that sound? Professor Nyth asked. Communication attempt, Mr. Mitchell explained. It's trying to establish contact. Should we respond? That depends on whether we want to invite a reality-bending interdimensional predator to a conversation. Katie was checking what appeared to be a specialized communication device. Actually, Dad, I think we might want to talk to it. Why? Because according to these readings, it's not alone anymore. The distress signal that Katie activated wasn't the kind that called for local emergency services. The device she used looked like it had been built by someone who understood that sometimes you needed help that existed outside normal reality. Emergency dimensional response. This is Mitchell Station requesting immediate Class X support, she said into the device. The response came immediately, but not through the communication system. It came through the house's reality shielding, which began displaying information that appeared directly in the air without any visible projection source. Mitchell Station, this is EDR Central. We're tracking your situation. Response team is inbound, ETA 4 minutes. 4 minutes, Professor Nyth asked. How is that possible? We're in the middle of rural farmland. Emergency dimensional response doesn't travel through normal space, Katie explained. They use alternative methods. What kind of alternative methods? Before Katie could answer, something appeared in the field outside the house. Not landed, not materialized. Appeared. One moment there was empty space. The next moment there was a structure that looked like someone had taken a military command center and redesigned it according to principles that owed more to modern art than engineering. That's the cavalry, Mr. Mitchell said with obvious relief. The structure extended what appeared to be a boarding tube toward the house, creating a sealed connection that bypassed the reality-distorting effects of their interdimensional visitor. Teams coming aboard, Katie announced. The beings that entered the house through the boarding tube looked human. But there was something about them that suggested they'd spent enough time dealing with impossible things that some of that impossibility had rubbed off on them. They moved with casual confidence through environment that was actively hostile to normal physics, and they carried equipment that looked like it had been designed by someone with access to technologies that didn't exist yet. Mitchell family, said the team leader, a woman whose eyes seemed to reflect light that wasn't actually there. Always a pleasure. What have we got this time? Class X reality bender, possibly territorial, definitely intelligent, Katie reported. It's been reshaping local space-time for the last hour and showing signs of establishing permanent residence. Any communication attempts? Just started trying to make contact. We haven't responded yet. Good. Let us handle the introductions. The team leader turned to address the research team, and when she looked at them, they got the distinct impression that she was seeing more than just their physical forms. Academic expedition from the Galactic Academy, she observed, here to study Earth's predator species. That's correct, Dr. Keelix said. Well, you picked an interesting day for it. What you're dealing with out there is something that most civilizations never encounter in their entire history. Is it dangerous? The team leader smiled, and her smile contained the kind of confidence that came from having successfully dealt with threats that existed beyond normal definition. Everything on Earth is dangerous, Doctor. The question is whether it's manageable, dangerous, or evacuate the solar system dangerous. And which is this? We're about to find out. The emergency dimensional response team went to work with the kind of casual efficiency that suggested they dealt with reality-threatening interdimensional predators on a regular Tuesday. Their leader, Commander Park, was consulting a device that appeared to be reading information from several dimensions simultaneously. Standard Protocol 7 situation, she announced. Class X entity, curious but not immediately aggressive, minimal collateral damage so far. Protocol 7, Dr. Keelix asked, or procedure for handling tourists. About 60% of interdimensional visitors are just exploring. They show up, reshape local reality to make themselves comfortable, look around, then move on. And the other 40%? Those decide they like the neighborhood and want to stay permanently. Commander Park was communicating with the interdimensional entity through methods that didn't involve any visible technology. She simply stood in the center of the room and spoke to empty air, but her words seemed to resonate with frequencies that existed in spaces between normal sound. Greetings, visitor. Welcome to Earth. We apologize for any inconvenience your arrival may have caused our local reality. The response came as patterns of light that appeared directly in everyone's visual cortex. The meaning translated as polite curiosity mixed with mild embarrassment. No harm intended. Your dimension intersected with my travel route. I was curious about the unusual energy signatures. Those would be our off-world visitors. They're here conducting academic research. Academic research into what? Earth's predator species. The pause seemed to last longer than normal time would suggest. They came here to study predators. On purpose. Yes, the light patterns took on qualities that could only be described as concerned confusion. Are they unaware of what this planet is? Commander Park turned to the research team. That's an excellent question. Are you aware of what this planet is? It's classified as a garden world, Dr. Keelix said. Peaceful biosphere, minimal threats, suitable for research. The interdimensional entity's response was definitely laughter. Garden world. This is a Class 12 survival testing facility. A what? Commander Park consulted her dimensional scanner. Class 12 means it's rated for training civilizations that have mastered reality manipulation. Most species that make it to Class 12 are already capable of casual time travel and matter creation. And Earth is Class 12? Well, technically Earth is Class PF, but we don't like to advertise that. It makes people nervous. What followed was the most terrifying educational experience in galactic academic history. Commander Park began explaining Earth's actual status in terms that made the research team question everything they thought they knew about reality. Earth isn't actually a naturally occurring planet, she said. It was designed, built, specifically constructed as a training facility for species that had evolved beyond normal survival challenges. What do you mean? Professor Nyth asked. The original builders wanted to create the ultimate survival scenario. A planet where every environmental factor was optimized to challenge developing civilizations. Weather systems that could kill by accident, geological processes that regularly reset the playing field, and a biosphere designed to produce creatures that could survive anything. But humans evolved here naturally, Dr. Nyth protested. Did we? Katie asked. The fossil record gets weird if you look at it too closely. Human evolution shows signs of external guidance, Commander Park explained. We adapted too quickly, developed intelligence too efficiently, and gained capabilities that don't match our environmental pressures. What kind of capabilities? We're the only known species that can safely interact with Class 9 and higher entities. Most civilizations that encounter something like our visitor either worship it as a god or get erased from existence. The interdimensional entity pulsed with agreement. Your species is unusual. Most beings that develop on survival worlds become highly specialized. Humans developed adaptability as their specialization. We're not the strongest or most intelligent species, Commander Park said. But we're the most adaptable. We can learn to survive anywhere, with anything, under any conditions. Katie was checking her communication device. Speaking of which, we've got a tour group coming through next week. 37 students from the Andromeda Collegiate, here to study extreme environment adaptation techniques. You have tour groups, Professor Nyth asked. Educational tourism is becoming a major industry, Mr. Mitchell said. Lots of species want to send their best and brightest to learn survival techniques from Earth specialists. But this place is trying to kill everything. That's why the training is so effective. Commander Park concluded her negotiations with the interdimensional entity, which began fading back toward whatever dimensions it normally inhabited. Our visitor has agreed to restore local space-time before departing. It apologizes for any inconvenience and thanks you for the educational experience. The educational experience? Most realities it visits don't have species that treat its presence as a minor scheduling conflict. It found our response instructive. The report that the research team filed led to the most significant reclassification in xenobiological history. The document, known as the Mitchell Protocols, fundamentally changed how galactic civilization understood both Earth and humanity. The key findings were summarized in a paragraph that made administrators across 17 star systems require emergency psychiatric evaluation. Earth is not a garden world that happened to develop dangerous predators. Earth is a military training facility masquerading as a peaceful agricultural planet. Humans are not curious academics who happen to be good at survival. They are professional survivors who have developed academic interests as a hobby. The immediate result was a complete revision of humanity's threat classification. Within 48 hours, every human in galactic space had been upgraded from friendly researcher to apex survival specialist with unknown capabilities. 3 species requested immediate military alliances with Earth. 17 others petitioned to establish survival training academies on human worlds. One entire civilization formally apologized for every interaction they'd ever had with humans, just in case they had accidentally offended the species that treated interdimensional predators as minor scheduling conflicts. Katie Mitchell became the first human to receive the Galactic Academy's Distinguished Service Award for advancing interspecies understanding through practical demonstration of human survival capabilities. She used the ceremony to announce her new academic program, Advanced Survival Techniques for Non-Human Species, with courses including Basic Predator Negotiation, Reality Manipulation Defense, and How to Survive on a Planet That's Actively Trying to Kill You. The waiting list for admission was expected to reach 3,000 years. The most significant change was philosophical. For the first time in galactic history, an entire civilization had to confront the possibility that the friendly, helpful humans they'd been working with were not just another spacefaring species. They were the graduates of the universe's most comprehensive survival program, and they had been treating the rest of galactic civilization with the patient kindness usually reserved for students who hadn't learned to handle the really dangerous stuff yet. The final entry in the Mitchell Protocols became the unofficial motto of Earth's new status. When humans call something mostly harmless, what they mean is, "I've seen it kill people, but not recently." Nobody laughed.